Hi everyone, and thank you for joining myself, Sophie Parrott, a journalist at HR Grapevine, today for an HR Grapevine and Rota Geek webinar titled Building the Foundations to Retain a Flexible Workforce. The coronavirus pandemic has, of course, had a huge impact on the world of work, and as well as kind of digital acceleration, it's really paved the way for flexible working. And while this flexibility does, of course, have many benefits for the staff, for businesses, there are follow-on questions around how employers can forecast labour to meet fluctuating customer demand, whilst also satisfying the needs of staff to maintain a better work-life balance. And it's some of these questions that we're going to be unpicking and exploring in greater detail in today's webinar. So for this session, I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Thomas, who is the Vice President of Customer Success at Rota Geek. Mark has over 20 years experience in workforce management and joined Rota Geek last year. Also joining today's panel is Simon Hadot, who is the co-founder at Rethink Productivity, and he works with retail and hospitality firms to help them deliver their organisational needs. And finally, we've also got Oliver Banks, who is a retail transformation consultant and the founder of OB&Co, who's also joining today's webinar. And a bit about Oliver, he helps retailers realise their strategy by defining their target operating model and delivering the transformation needed to bring it to life. So now that's all of the introductions done. Welcome to our panel of speakers. But before we get started with some of the questions and unpicking some of the topic today, just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. So in the toolbar at the side of your screen, there is a question function. So feel free to put forward any questions that you may have to our panel, and we'll try to get to these towards the end of the webinar. We'll also be launching a couple of polls, and there should be a poll on the right hand side of your screen now, so please also get involved with those as and when they crop up throughout the duration of the webinar. So kind of just to get things kicked off today, the pressure to adapt to flexible working has already been there, before the pandemic in the retail space. Is this something that you would agree with? What are your thoughts on this? Who wants to take that first?
I'll jump straight in. I think flexible working absolutely has been a trending movement in retail, and I don't actually argue retail has led the way across all industries there. I would say flexible working has been in existence in retail for probably over a couple of decades now. 0 hours contracts are perhaps the initial rise of flexible working, but increasingly that has evolved more into a two-way relationship, in as much as there's flexibility for the colleague, for the employee, as well as for the employer. And that comes in around everything from parents not able to work in school holidays to students being able to work in school holidays and adjusting hours around studies or moving between stores. And really it helps people to allow life to happen. No one sees work as their entire life, and it reduces the flexibility, or reduces the rigidity, I should say, for all involved.
Okay, so I guess various different aspects there. So you kind of say that it was there before, but the pandemic has certainly helped that to evolve. Also, kind of speaking of the pandemic, resilience was kind of a buzzword that we have seen crop up quite a bit. Retail businesses were definitely faced with, the results of the restrictions and supply chain issues, and different employee-related challenges. We also saw the need for workforces having to isolate in some cases, homeschool, and shielding were also some of the other challenges that employers were kind of having to deal with. Did you see, would you say that retail businesses successfully adapted to the employee challenges in order to try and stay resilient?
Yeah, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Simon.
Absolutely. I think anybody that's worked in retail will really understand that retailers adapt all the time, and this was just a much bigger adaptation than maybe they have before. So clearly they were faced with all those challenges, customers coming in, maybe some in more of an orderly fashion. So if you think back to the start of the pandemic, we were restricted to numbers in stores and where we couldn't go. But also I think we need to just acknowledge the creativity as well. So there were those organisations that couldn't open the shop but shipped to us. The flexibility that Ollie talked around, that kind of two-way bargaining. I know lots of retailers that really supported colleagues during that time, and colleagues stepped up to help them as well. So they worked more hours, they worked different hours, and we were all trading off things in our personal life as well. So I think the pandemic's shown us across retail as an exemplar, as well as the kind of the NHS, let's not forget them, that flexibility in the workforce is a two-way conversation. And when it works really well, it works for the employee, the employer, and the customer.
Yeah, I've seen some nods from both Oliver and Mark there. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to kind of add or shed light on in response to this question in particular?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Some very good points made already, and I think part of this move to the more flexible and being a lot more resilient opened a lot of people's eyes to some of the traditionally thought of as the downshifts, the dog day afternoons, the I don't want to do Sundays. Actually wasn't the case. People really did enjoy that, being able to be that much more flexible and being made to make that choice of okay, well, I can't do Monday, Wednesday and Friday 10 to 6 anymore. I need to fit in with the business a little bit, because everyone's, it's that lovely kind of blitz mentality that Brits have and display so well. And people suddenly realize, well, actually, working on a Sunday afternoon isn't such a bad thing anymore. So we started to see people being a little bit more, I think, our teams, our colleagues, our employees, call them what you will, it's kind of opened their eyes to being able to work in a bit more flexible way. So an upside from it, possibly.
Okay, so I guess a change in potential perceptions there.
Yeah.
As well. I guess kind of moving on, in the retail industry, it's kind of all about having the right people in the right place at the right time. And particularly, I suppose, when you're trying to forecast your labour to customer demand. So how can businesses continue to give their employees a better work-life balance, which is something that lots of employees want today, and control over their working schedules when this need exists in the background? Oliver, perhaps if I can come to you first on this one.
Well, I think we've touched on this two-way conversation, and I think it really has to start from that. It is a recognition from the employer and the employee that both have needs, and it's a mutual respect, bit of give and take, so to speak. You also talk about, in that very phrase, the right people, and from a retailer's perspective, if you are not having that conversation, you don't understand the individual, the actual person behind the name, so to speak, on the paycheck. And therefore, if you can't understand them, how do you know they're the right person, would be my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting that the word background was in that conversation as well. It's we're saying that the employee better work-life balance is in the background. Well, that's possibly part of the problem. It doesn't want to be. It doesn't need to be in the background. It needs to be in the forefront. And being able to, with a good degree of accuracy, forecast where your labour requirements are going to be, it gives you the opportunity to recruit better, to recruit into where you need that member of staff, rather than traditionally working along the old style work patterns. So it has a dual benefit. It allows you to go and seek new colleagues, new team members that actually that requirement fits their lifestyle.
I think the final bit I'd add to those comments would be around multi-skilling. So in a world where people want to be more flexible, have more of a choice about when they can and can't work, from an employer's point of view, there might then be a need that people work across multiple functions. So I can work the checkouts and work stock and work on various counters maybe. So seeing it breaking down silos within organizations, as there's a need for people to work across different parts of that retail shop, supermarket, wherever it might be.
Okay. We're just going to take a quick pause on the questions and just have a look at some of the results that we got from the first poll, which we launched at the beginning of the webinar. So thank you everyone who has taken part already. Got, I guess, a couple more seconds to cast your votes. The question that we did ask was, what's been the biggest challenge you faced in trying to adopt flexible working policies? And at the moment, coming out in joint top with 26% is the lack of available staff and attracting talent, or supporting technology and digital tools. Actually, now I've said that, it's toggled slightly. So the one which is coming out on top is supporting technology and digital tools with 29%. And then in second position is the one that I said, lack of available staff and attracting talent. So those are the ones which seem to be coming out as the biggest challenges. Is this something that you think or thought prior to hearing about the results would come out on top, or, you know, what are your thoughts around that?
I certainly would have expected the lack of available talent and the difficulty of retaining it was probably going to come up fairly close, if not streets ahead at the top. The tech point, it's great that it's come out, because it really is. It's quite something that's becoming more prevalent as we get a much more tech savvy and a tech demanding workforce. You know, I'm not going to start going down the Gen Z millennial route, because I have a millennial and she punches me every time I use the word. So, yeah, the expectation that the technology will support a modern workforce is very much there. You know, photographing the schedule and sending it to all your mates on WhatsApp is no longer a particularly good way of going forward.
Okay, perfect. So thank you to everyone that engaged with that poll. We're going to put a second one up in due course, so feel free to get involved with that as well. Back to the conversation. Obviously, you know, we talked about employee challenges previously in the webinar. So how far do you think the employee challenges we've been discussing have affected retention and attraction rates for staff within these industries? Perhaps, Simon, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's part of a rounded picture. So a flexible offering in terms of your work-life balance, I think, is really important for everybody these days, and certainly those that have gone back to stores or customer-facing environments post-pandemic. But I think it's part of a wider offering. But, you know, we're seeing on a daily basis now, we're seeing organisations in retail who are going past national living wage in terms of what they're going to pay colleagues on the floor. So it's a really, really competitive market retail at the moment, from a wage point of view, from a benefits point of view. I think the point in the poll around tech, from a what do you enable me to do my job well, and what things can I interact with the businesses. So lots of organizations with apps specifically for colleagues, so they can, you know, trade holidays, buy holidays, sell holidays, all those softer benefits, digital pay slips. So I think it's a really important part of a much wider package that colleagues are now in a market where it's a colleague or a colleague's market rather than an employer's market, have much more choice as well. So we've talked historically around the gig economy. I think maybe we've not seen that come to fruition as we thought, but it's certainly a colleagues market rather than employees market to find the culture, the purpose, the company, and the wider benefits that they feel comfortable with. And if they're not, they'll vote with their feet and move somewhere else.
Yeah.
Anything else to add in response to what Simon said there? It seems as if you might all be in agreement on the general themes that were raised there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, good points, well made for me.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'm sure everyone watching today is also very much in agreement based on the results of that first poll in terms of those challenges of, you know, particularly attracting talent. But I think it's also important to think about the retention of talent as well, which, you know, if you can keep a good team member, that is just as good as hiring a brand new one, right?
Yeah, and of course it's the cost of that churn, that staff churn, you know, especially as we get into the more specialized retail functions where there's a fairly big degree of product knowledge required, there's training required. And we start looking, you know, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000 to train, upskill and onboard a new member of staff it's a scary thought. So retaining them,
all of that interviewing time and effort,
yeah, absolutely,
that goes through as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, meeting KPIs like revenue targets, labour budgets, and customer satisfaction are all kind of still high on the agenda for retail businesses. How far would you say that flexible working policies can go if there is always a need to have the right level of staff on a shop floor, for example? Oliver, can I come to you first on that one, perhaps?
So it's a balance between between colleagues and the business requirements, really. It's not just about the individuals driving the demand of I don't want to work on a Saturday, thank you very much. It is about almost building a team and inspiring that team to achieve the goal, right? And the goal is, there'll be lots of goals. You touched on many of them. Revenue is probably the most obvious one, right? That stores or warehouses or whatever will reflect on. But I also think it's really important to be understanding what it is that you actually do need, not necessarily having a fixed, rigid schedule of, we always need, make up the numbers depending on what any individual business is requiring, 5 people in store on a Monday morning, whatever. But understanding what it is you need, when during the week and over the course of the year, that of course changes. And then really being able to clearly track where your gaps are going to be and having a conversation to say, how do we, as a team, plug this?
Yeah, and I think once again, a good point. And this again is where tech is such an enabler. Where you have those vacant shifts. How can you get that conversation out to the workforce in a larger way? And we look at our workforce. It's Friday afternoon. I'm 18 years old. There's a gig on tonight. I've got a ticket. I have 2 choices. I can either phone all my mates and get them to swap a shift with me, or I can pull a sickie. Well, using tech, you can drive that. You can firstly drive that conversation. I used to work in hospitality. The amount of times you'd be sitting there on a Friday evening thinking, "There's a big gig in town tonight. I wonder how many people are not going to show." But you're like, you give the team the ability to interact with their teammates and make those decisions themselves. And it drives down that unplanned absence too, which is the biggest killer for customer service, really.
I think that was a really nice example actually just then about the, having almost that choice, and I suppose having the tech and the communication channels in place can really, really help with that. I'm just going to, again, take a quick pause. I'm just going to have a look at some of the results from our second poll. So we essentially asked our attendees, have you considered how your digital workforce management solutions can support flexible working policies? Now, at the moment, it appears we have a clear winner. With 54%, which is yes, our current solution is supporting us with this. In second position with 31% is yes, but currently our solution can't help us to adopt this change. So I think essentially, although the results are kind of toggling slightly, it appears that yes, in some capacity, that they have considered how digital management solutions can support flexible working policies. On that basis, is that something again that you kind of forethought or expected with the results of this poll?
I think for me, yes. I think if we were to actually rewind a couple of years and ask that same question, I think it would be a very different answer set, would be my guess. I mean, it's great to see that so many companies have made great inroads in this area, but it's obviously a work in progress as well, as you can see by that second answer.
I think it's encouraging to see the results. As Oliver said, I think there was lots of organisations prior to the pandemic that probably couldn't communicate directly with colleagues and had layers of management or supervisory that they had to go through. So even simple things like that seem to have come on. But yeah, it's great to see that there's a high percentage of people there, or at least aiming to get there, because if you're not, then that's probably where you're going to see those colleagues move into those organisations that are on the front foot.
And I think the runner-up in the poll talking about, my tech doesn't quite support that, and I think that partially speaks to the early adopters, the retailers that got in early and bought the tech as it was then, but it's moved on. The technology is never still, and it's constantly moving forward. So we do see a lot of people out there. They've still got the old on-premise solutions, and they're still trying to work through stuff that's effectively become legacy. So again, I'm not that surprised to see it running in second.
Hey Mark, can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you're talking to retailers, do you tend to see when someone has got on a bit too early, perhaps, do they need to do a full system replacement, or is it something that you can bolt on top to enable this flexible working?
Well, I mean, really, I suppose like so much tech, that workforce management systems are not great at talking to one another. If you're sitting in an on-prem situation, if you're sitting in an on-prem or legacy, it's invariably the case it's either out of support or it's end of life. So the chance to continue developing with that tool and building off it is generally, that chance has gone. And of course, now with the move to SaaS, we look at retailers, the till system SaaS, the traffic counters SaaS, payroll SaaS, and the whole sort of labor management tools are stepping into that space, and a lot of them very successfully. So the answer is probably not as much as we'd like.
I mean, I think that sort of reflects the wider system market. You mentioned that there, right? Increasingly we need to think about, flexible data and so on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine, Simon, you've got some good thoughts on that. I mean, you see it from so many different angles.
Yeah, I think people get stuck in what they know, and once you're in a world of SaaS, it seems to become much easier to kind of move, swap, look at different options, bolt things together. I'm not massively technical. For those that know me, I can kind of use my phone and my car, and that's about it. But it seems to be much more of a plug and play world now, and I'm really dumbing that down for any technical people watching this, and I don't mean to do you a disservice. But gone are the days of, a 3-year implementation, multi-million-pound cost before you've done anything. Now we're seeing people getting there a lot quicker. And I think I would go back to the pandemic did teach us that people have tried stuff, they spun stuff up quickly, failed fast and moved on. So the one great thing we saw across lots of organizations in and outside of retail in the pandemic was they did stuff differently. We've worked with companies that they've had on their plan in 3 years' time about collection. They did it in 6 days because there was a real need. So that fail fast mentality, I hope to see that keep moving through, because it just keeps moving those organizations forward, and all in the benefit of colleagues and customers.
Really good point, actually.
Okay, well, we're just going to move on now to kind of how businesses can start to implement or enhance their flexible working practices. There's lots of stuff out there about people wanting to be an employer of choice, and the follow-on benefits of retention and attraction and all of those things. So I suppose retailers need to be able to evidence that they can deliver this and offer what staff are looking for. In that sense, have you seen any businesses successfully changing their policies or tech to accommodate flexible working practices for their staff members?
Yeah, I think I've probably been in workforce management for too many years now, to be fair. But what we've always seen, and I know Simon's done a huge amount of implementations as well, is implementing a workforce management, implementing a labour management tool is often used as a vehicle to make those changes within the business, because the whole process of going in and making those discoveries and understanding how the business works and questioning those business policies as to why do we do this drives quite a lot of change into the business, and generally for the good. Simon, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's simple things that kind of come down to those successful companies. So if you're in a world of having more flexible colleagues, you're going to have different start and end times. So, historically in retail, we might have had an 8 till 5, a 9 till 6. If you're open late, an 11 till 8, potentially. Now we could have colleagues starting on the half hour, the quarter past the hour. And it's just being mindful of things like a daily brief. So you may have got the majority of your team together at 9, maybe midday. Now with people starting at different points across the day, how do you make sure they're engaged and briefed? So is there an app that you've got for the colleagues where they can hear the brief from the manager? Maybe the manager records the brief as a video. Maybe there's text sent down. So it's the nuances of things like that where you've got subtle shifts in flexibility, which is historically been quite rigid, that you need to start to think about differently. And there's loads of great examples of tech and people doing those things to keep the engagement in colleagues, rather than, well, we do the brief at 9, we stick an A4 piece of paper on the notice board. If you read it, you read it. If you don't, you don't. But actually, there's probably some important things commercially, personally, that you are more likely to miss out on unless you've equipped your colleagues with the tools and the applications to be engaged, whilst there's also an expectation that things are changing. My start and end time may be daily, weekly, monthly.
Yep, and I think, as we see this growing, this need for communications for different platforms, etc., interoperability. Ooh, my teeth back in, is becoming such a key consideration. Is how well does one piece of software talk to everybody else? Can my tech bolt onto the side? Can I expose this piece of tech through another piece? And trying to reduce that number of different systems that are needed to log in just to get through your day. It's being able to go into this almost one place fits all.
Yeah, my doomsday scenario would be that I have to have my phone with 16 different apps on, with 16 different logons, that are all different types of passwords with different special characters and all sorts of stuff. To see 16 different things as a colleague, I want that tech. I want to be able to consume the data at my time, maybe at home if that's my choice, maybe not. But I want to go to one place for it probably.
Absolutely, and it's that horror, isn't it, of waking up on a Monday morning and seeing you need to change your password on 15 different apps.
Yeah, that I couldn't remember in the first case anyway.
You couldn't remember to begin with, yeah.
Okay, well, obviously, there's been a big focus on tech solutions in the retail space at the moment. And interestingly, Microsoft, they published a report earlier this year as part of their World Trend Index initiative, which was called Technology Can Help Unlock a New Future for Frontline Workers. And within this, tech ranked third on the list of factors that workers say that could help reduce workplace stress. And this was following behind better pay and holiday. Would you say that this is a surprise? I mean, obviously, just touching on some of the conversations you had then, it feels like tech could be really useful in breaking down some of those problems. Oliver, you're nodding. I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
So I'm not so convinced by this report, I have to be honest. I think firstly, tech is a really big term, right? And there's so many ways that technology can help anyone in a business. It could be, if we're talking around helping colleagues in a store, it could be around planning and scheduling, for example. It could be around training. It could be around communication. It could be around tools to do the job. How easy is it to check the stock levels of a particular product right there on the shop floor, or do I need to go off to a rigid terminal, for example? I also think comparing tech and pay and holiday is an interesting one. For me, I don't think I've ever heard someone saying, I am stressed because of pay and holiday. So the report words it as pay and holiday as a nice solution to stress. But actually, I think it's more of a band-aid. It's a short-term fix that if I'm stressed at work, you pay me, a bit extra per hour, per year, whatever that metric is. I might feel better for a short amount of time, but that inherent stress is not brought on by the pay. It may contribute to my life stress, but it's not my job stress, I would say. There's lots of things that do bring that on around lack of appreciation or lack of training or lack of management support or colleague support. So for me, I think that the report is a little muddled. I'm interested to hear from Mark and Simon on this one though.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with you, Ollie. I mean, I can remember in my days in hospitality, it was always you get the worst service in a quiet restaurant because all the staff were off wandering off doing other things. And that was, that overstaffing, understaffing is stressful. And we do have, I think I said it earlier, there's an expectation now that I can use technology to interact with my daily life. I can do my shopping. I can talk to my friends. I can decide what I'm going to watch at the movies. I can decide what I can actually watch the movie. Why can't I do that with my work life? Why do I have to phone my manager who's stressed and busy? And because we're squaring that ever decreasing circle of cost versus profit versus customer experience. So yeah, I think pay, yeah, it's important. We've got to pay people properly. We've got to pay them a living wage. And I think I remember, Ollie, from some years ago, there was it might have been Stanford University or Harvard, because they do all of these studies, that the impact of a pay rise was about 6 weeks before it sort of melds back into being the usual drudge, the usual miserable day. Simon?
Yeah, I've seen some stats. I think if you give somebody a pay rise who's about to leave, they typically stay for 3 to 6 months afterwards, because those problems that made the initial resignation or the conversation don't go away. So it's a short-term motivator. I think for me, for thinking about colleagues, I think there's just a watch out with tech for them of, does that mean I'm contactable all the time? Is there an expectation I'm doing things outside of work? If you send in an email, I see ones from organizations now that say, I'm sending this because it's convenient for me, don't feel the need to answer straight away. I think, is it California where it's now illegal to send an email to somebody outside of their working hours? So
and Portugal and Spain, I believe.
So yeah, the thing for me, I could see why tech could bring on stress or that kind of behavior, how it manifests, because am I contactable 24/7 now? Is there an expectation my manager sends me a note on my holiday request via the app that I have to answer on my day off, week off? So I think there's a really fine line to walk of, the tech is an enabler. It shouldn't be an expectation that people are online or on hand all the time, because that's where we kind of then circle back round to the whole flexibility, work-life balance, and start to undermine it.
I think it's important, just sticking on this topic for a moment, as we're thinking about attracting talent and retaining talent, I think this is hugely optimistic, because it means we don't always need to turn to the pay answer, right? There are lots of great, relatively simple, relatively quick, relatively cheap things that we can do to really make a particular role, a particular place of work much more attractive for an individual, other than just pay. Pay is lovely because it is very tangible and it is very comparable for any individual or any company actually to look at too and think, well, this one is better because the number is bigger, right?
Yeah, and I think, as we said, money's a short-term motivator and not a motivator at all for some people. Some people love the ability to go and work with a team, the interaction with customers, and all those other things that come around it. And pay is almost a bonus if you love your job that much. So I think, yeah, you're right. There's all the bits that sit around that, as well as, in some occasions, the government are going to make that pay rise anyway, because they're driving national living wage. So for lots of retailers, the bar's already set for them and you can track that pay across, but clearly others are trying to drive that on further.
Okay, and moving on, there's a lot of workforce management and scheduling tech out there in the market. How can some of these best of breed solutions help with implementing flexible working policies for staff, do you think? I'm not sure who wants to take that one first. Any volunteers?
I'll have a go.
Okay.
So I think from what we've seen, yeah, clearly there's some really good tech out there at the moment, and it's never been easier probably to jump on board or to move across back to the conversation of people moving from having solutions they own through to a software as a service model. For me, I think there's a couple of things. One, it's a consistent repository for data. So it holds some employee data, some will come from HR, but it's probably the system that holds when people can work, and probably more importantly, when they can't work. Maybe it also holds what skills they can do and brings all that together with all the other bits of insight and AI and algorithms that go to produce the best plan, whether that's by the manager interacting with it, whether it's by an auto schedule or a mixture of both. But I think then if you start to bolt on all the other smart things that these organizations are doing, so the apps that they provide, some of the comms platforms that are all in there, being able to book holidays, being able to shift swap, as Mark talked about before, we get to this place where you've got kind of an employee-centric model that helps get the manager 80-90% of the way there a lot quicker, with a lot more powerful information and dashboards and KPIs for the field and senior team, but also is a consistent framework. So people are being treated consistently, their data's held securely, and we've got a record of it in one place, where historically, back to my time as a store manager, it may be in a filing cabinet. You know what, we probably didn't even regularly ask people when they could work, or how they wanted to change their hours, or when they couldn't work. Yep. We employed them on these hours, and that's what you did until something changed. And it was very difficult to change it then, because if we enforced it as an organisation, we had to give 12 weeks notice, and you didn't do that because you'd upset people. So it's a massive leap forward as the tech keeps expanding, and I think organisations start to move maybe more people across locations in retail, because you retain the experience, and my flexibility means that I can go and work in store A and B. It just opens up that pool of talent they've got, helps give people variety, while also, there's one moment of truth in there. So yeah, I'm excited still. The tech, it changes and moves forward every month, and there's still a long way to go, but it's all in the benefit of driving right people, right place, right time with the right skills.
And as we move into this more flexible workforce, where, as Simon alluded to earlier, people are no longer starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and finish at 6 with an hour for lunch. It's not like they might be starting at 10:45. Finishing at some time later. It's not a Monday to Friday job anymore. It's 2 days off, but some of that's weekends. And modern workforce management tools can start to make them, because it's more difficult to make the schedule equitable and fair. You need something that's going to help you to make sure that the same people aren't doing Saturday and Sunday every week. The same people aren't doing the late shift every Friday evening, and people are, if there's a company policy that everyone gets 2 days off together, they're getting it. Trying to do that with a pen and a piece of paper, then typing it into Excel is a huge ask, and one that, because as again Simon spoke about, the repository of information is not there, you're making these mistakes, and that's where I think workforce management can certainly step in as well. And again, it starts to drive that. I want to work at store A because they always I get the shifts mostly that I'd like. I get to work mostly when I can. And I think another point Simon pointed to is, I can now work in 2 stores, or I can work in 3 stores or 4. Often you'll have one store, it's only got 20 hours available for a week, and the person's looking for a full-time job. And then we end up with they're working for you, and they're also working for somebody else. Well, the person who treats them the best, if there's a call out and they have to call them in, we know where they're going. If somebody, if the manager says, can you work an extra hour this evening because, for whatever reason, are they going to turn up an hour late for their other job, or is that other job part of the same company? Have I now got my 40 hours a week because I work in 2 different stores?
Yeah, and I think it's important to, as you start to think about these shifts, obviously lots of different companies are in lots of different places, as we heard in the poll a little earlier on. But this is a massive transformation. If you have not started yet, there is a huge change to all involved at this stage. And I think it's really also important to think about, as you are talking about implementing flexible working and implementing technology to support flexible working, there's lots of other non-tech sides to consider as well. And if you are going from an old-fashioned business model to a modern business model or operating model, then there's many different ways to do that as well. And we've seen some good ways and some bad ways, but really I'd encourage opening the conversation. Start to talk to the colleagues, start to explain where we're heading and why it's great. You don't want to have to go, if you're wanting to do this very quickly, you don't want to have to go down a fire and rehire route. It's quite an extreme level. So it is a journey to go on. And I think it's important to reflect that.
Yeah, and it's understanding, is your organization ready to make that change, or what do you need to do beforehand? And we've spoken about interoperability and the different platforms that are available. And I think it's making sure you understand that all of these things enable you to make the change. They don't do it for you. They're not a universal panacea. They will not make your HR transformation happen, but they will enable you to do it well. They'll enable you to do it a huge amount faster. I'm sorry, I've run out of steam there.
Okay, I'm just going to flag a poll which we have just launched, which is our third poll of the webinar. And the question is, how much of a priority is implementing the best of breed workforce management and scheduling solutions? So just feel free to cast your votes, and then we will reflect back on those results shortly. And kind of just to follow on from the question and the responses you guys just gave, in terms of wider business challenges like forecasting labour to demand to help schedule staff, how can some of these solutions help?
So I think, and I would say, I think firstly, it's having a good understanding of your workload. So how long things take. Of course, I'd say that because that's what we do. We measure tasks. But again, having a fair and equitable system that facilitates that. I think making it visual. So having a nice way of presenting, this is when your work happens, and then being able to plot people against it. But I think in an ever-changing retail environment, it's being able to adapt to trends, seasonality. We didn't think, no one ever considered in the last 2 years we'd have stores closed for such a long time, or those that were open would be doing so well. So these systems just all help facilitate those changing shapes. And as Mark says, people have been working out on Excel, on pieces of paper. Gut feel is what we work on a lot in retail as well. This takes away and busts all those myths and becomes fact. And at times it's very difficult to argue with fact. You're always going to need an element of local knowledge. You can't replace people with systems. The systems are there to help facilitate, help them make better or quicker decisions. I think if it's kind of computer says this, that's what you've got to do, that's when you start to breed some resistance. So if it's seen as a facilitator, an enabler, then you've got the right work, the right people planned against it. You can only assume that you're going to get the best or a better result. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's making sure that your operations team are bought into that labour model, that it means something to them. They need to understand the exact science behind it, and trust me, there's a lot of science behind it. But that you're having that discourse that they understand that this is the shape of the labour, and it's driven by this, and it's great. But I've always found when you move into this forecasting, scheduling, and labour demand, it's the change management piece that's probably the most challenging, because Molly's always worked 10 to 4 on the Wednesday. It's what she does, and it's overcoming those objections that are more lifestyle based and less business requirement. But you've got to balance. There's those two ends. You've got sort of the business requirements at this side and your team's requirements at the other, and it's making sure that you don't try and move the needle at either end too quickly.
I think that change management piece is really absolutely critical. I'd like to throw in another thought here as well. So I spent a number of years at Tesco, and one of the things that almost got drilled into me there was the concept of plan, do, review, and thinking about that. And I think as you are thinking about the bigger business challenges, and as you are going on this journey of workforce management, think about how the tools can help you to do plan, do, review. So, from a plan perspective, think about what's the work expected? What are those patterns coming forward? How are you going to get right people in the right place at the right time? Then from a do perspective, you're talking more tactical or operational. How are you communicating with your team to make sure that those schedules are going to be delivered, and actually then what actually is happening, and how are you recording that, and how are you staying flexible in the moment so that when someone does inevitably call in sick, with or without a gig in the evening, you can respond, right? And then from a review perspective, it's about how do you put in place a sort of an after action review in terms of what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what was the difference, what can we learn, and what are we going to do going forward. And I think all of those combined present you with a real vehicle to continually improve how you are going about scheduling, how you are going about, making sure you do have that right resource in the right place, and ultimately how you are delivering for your customers as well.
Okay, and just to kind of round that off, I'm just going to go back to the poll that we put up. Just a reminder, the question was, how much of a priority is implementing a best of breed workforce management and scheduling solution? And at the moment, we've got 53% saying it's a priority. We have an active project, so that appears to be the clear front runner there. And then in second position, we're not looking at our workforce management solutions right now with 33%, and 13% saying we're going to be looking at it within the next 6 months. So as I said, over 50% are saying it's a priority and something that they've got an active project, and 33% are saying that they're not looking at their workforce management solutions now. Again, is this something that you're expecting? Do you have maybe any insights that you could share based on the results that we've just received?
I think from what we see, certainly within retail, people are in different places with various solutions. So I'm kind of not surprised that there's a big bunch of people where it's active and a big bunch of people that are potentially are happy with they've got or are kind of developing that forward. So the market's very split. People coming to the market in terms of looking for solutions, people really getting the most out of their solutions they've got, or people maybe even just at the start of the journey. So no, not surprised by the split.
Does that resonate with both of you as well, Oliver and Mark?
I think the 50% actively looking is probably a little surprising. It was quite so high because if we looked at the previous poll, we had over 50% that were happy with the tech they were using. So, but yeah, I think that sounds about right.
Well, I actually think slightly differently, Mark. Actually, so we had lots of people saying before, yes, our current solution is helping us with flexible working, but it's also a journey, right? It's not just a done once and forget, case closed. It is something that you continually want to think about how you can level up because, well, I mean, 50% of people are leveling up. So as you want to remain competitive and attractive as an employer of choice in the market, how are you staying with the market as well?
Okay, well, thank you to obviously Oliver, Mark and Simon for sharing their thoughts in the webinar. We've got time now for a couple of questions, so thank you to those that have sent in questions, and of course if there are any questions that you want us to try and get to in the next 10 minutes or so, then please feel free to share them with us in the Q&A function to the side of your screen. I'm just going to start off with a couple of questions that we did receive ahead of the webinar. So I guess the first one we'll start with is we've got a lot of part-time workers. I think being flexible is easier with a full-time workforce. Do you have any thoughts or insights into this? Simon, if I can come to you on that one.
Yeah. So again, putting my store manager hat back on, I can understand why that might be a sentiment for people. So the more people you have, you've got less full-timers, maybe more part-timers, the more appraisals you've got to do, the more kind of colleague admin that sits around that piece. So I can understand from a leadership point of view why you'd inherit more work. I think that the trade-off is you should be able to spend your wage budget better. You should be less recruitment over time as you get people to flex up and flex down in terms of filling those vacancies. And overall, you should end up with a happier workforce because you've got that work-life balance, which we've kind of talked about throughout the session today.
Okay, and Mark, if I can come to you on this one, please. Workforce management and scheduling solutions can be pricey. Are there any other ROI or KPI points that you can perhaps build into a business case for one?
Oh, good Lord, huge question. We could probably do another webinar on this one.
Just a couple of your top thoughts.
Yeah, so I think some that can be built in has been mentioned earlier, and that's reducing your staff churn by fair and equitable scheduling. It has a huge impact on that. We can look and it often sounds like a bold claim, but I know Simon will agree with me that a well-planned schedule that executes in line with your customer expectations and your demand will have a positive impact on your turnover. So, we've seen some large retailers have spoken back and said, implementing workforce management has driven my top line by 1%. So in terms of building that business case, there's a couple of examples that I'd certainly talk straight to, and one that I have to call out, but it's never the nicest conversation, is compliance. We have a lot of retailers working very close to or on that national minimum wage, and we have to make sure that we're paying them correctly and that we're paying them on time. So yeah, there's a couple there.
Yeah, a couple bits of food for thought, I suppose. And Oliver, and this one for you, if I may. Attraction into the retail industry can be tough. Some people may view it as a stopgap rather than a career choice. Have you seen any businesses successfully attract a more permanent workforce in the retail industry, and maybe kind of any top tips around that?
Yeah, so it's absolutely a great point, and there is a stat that is colossal in terms of the number is wrong, and I can't remember the source, so I apologize for that, but it's something like 70% of people in total start their career, their working life in retail, which I think for our industry is a huge responsibility, right? We are setting the attitudes and the etiquettes of business life in the retail industry. And I'd add in hospitality. I'd imagine that number goes even higher, right? So I think it's really important to think about what is it we can do, and recognizing that a huge amount of top leaders start in retail. So what is it that we need to do in terms of career progression, in terms of career journey? How do we begin to even identify and understand the skills and perspectives of each individual? And so we can best leverage that, I think, going forward. And for me, it's a word I've used a few times in the past hour. It's a conversation with each individual, and really understanding that it's, there is a person there, and there's a set of goals and dreams. If you don't understand what those are, you have no chance of ultimately, keeping that person going and fulfilling their career.
Thank you. And we've got time for just one last question that we've recently had come in. So what understanding do you have about how not-for-profits in the UK are dealing with agile/remote working in 2022? Any volunteers who might want to tackle that one first?
So I'll jump in. It's not an area I have a huge amount of experience with, but I think, I'd welcome any clarification on sort of the precise not-for-profits, whether it's sort of around charity stores that are relying on perhaps a volunteer workforce, which of course, if you are relying on someone giving up their time to support a cause, then, you can't be so rigid with the requirements. But for me, it's about, building that team mentality and making sure that people are aligned in what they are ultimately trying to do. Mark, I'm not sure what your thoughts were going to be.
I was going to proceed with the same caveat as you used, though, Oliver, I don't have a huge amount of experience in not-for-profits, but again, certainly it goes back to that conversation that it's, the great thing about not-for-profits is people are doing it for a different reason, and that this isn't paying the bills, it's not putting the kids through school, and it's having the conversation and making sure that you're not seen to be or inadvertently taking advantage of the goodwill of other people, and in employing a good scheduling practice and a good scheduling tool will allow you to be a little bit closer to that.
All right, well, thank you everyone for sending in your questions. Of course, thanks again to our panel for sharing their insights with us today, and for engaging with some of the questions that we had sent through at the end. So just wanted to say a massive thank you again to Mark, Simon and Oliver, and of course to RotaGeek, who we partnered with for today's webinar. If you do have any questions, then please endeavour to get in touch with RotaGeek directly. Thank you for our audience for sending in your questions and participating in all of the polls throughout. It was really interesting to get your insights throughout the duration of the webinar. But all that's left to say really is that I hope you will have a fantastic rest of the day and weekend when it arrives, and we look forward to welcoming you back to additional webinars in future. Thank you, everyone.